Greetings, brothers and sisters. So it's time to call out all these people that were really douchey about the anti-vaxxers and, you know, making the anti-vaxxers into something that, well, they weren't. A threat to humanity, criminals, people who should die. I'll have a whole, I'll show you my compilation first, and then I'll show some video updates, some stuff to do with Kyrie Irving and Aaron Rodgers. But overall, we now know that the vaccine didn't save us from COVID. That's been confirmed by Bill Gates, amongst other people. And that people are now, for the most part, it's around 50% of people who got the vax regret it. And I guess pretty much nobody who didn't get the vax regrets it, right? Like there's people don't regret not getting the vax is a saying that's, there. I'm sure there's some, but not 50% of the people who didn't get the vax regret it. But there are people who did, and this is, before side effects have become as bad as they're possibly going to be in the future, right? And so just as an understanding here, I don't believe in apologies. I think apologies are stupid. Apologies, what I think about is, does the person, myself included, realize they did something wrong that harmed other people? Their behaviors, your mistakes, whatever it is. And do you regret it? And have you done something to make sure you don't do something like that again? Like that's how the Sajmarg meditation works. There's a whole maxim devoted to realizing when you make a mistake and praying to God for forgiveness and then asking for help so you don't do that mistake again. And working personally to make sure you don't do it, right? And everything else is just performative and fake and posing, right? When somebody gives you an apology, you have to question, is the person giving you the apology because they have to? Have they been caught doing something and you're mad at them or everyone's mad at them? They've been exposed publicly. There's a scandal for some celebrity or politician and they have their lawyers handcraft a statement and they're expected to apologize. Remember, they tried to force Kyrie Irving to apologize for posting some, video that was, considered anti-Semitic, but it was it's still up on Amazon. And the lawyers and the people, your handlers, get together and they force you to, to spit out some apology you don't really believe in, right? Because you're just doing it to save your brand and save your, save face and, whatever it is, right? So that's not sincere. And people in your personal life, if they know you're mad at them, and they figure if they do an apology, they can just smooth it over, and then they just do the same thing over again. They're going to do the same thing over to you again, in the future, and apologize again, and it's just like it becomes a burden for you to try to figure out if that person's sincere, and really it puts the onus on you to make sure the person changes, and when they are supposed to do that themselves, right? They're supposed to feel regret, they're supposed to feel bad about what they're doing, and they're supposed to want to change, right? So this is, an apology. And so I don't like apologies because, like, it's more work for me. Like, for the most part, it's work for me to figure out if the person's being sincere, me to call them on their BS and say, all right, why you apologize? And what did you learn? Well, like they're a kid or something, right? And so what I prefer is that people take accountability and realize what they've done. And so this is what they've done to all of us who are what they call anti-vaxxers. And again, I'll show you the compilation to back all this up, right? And so first of all, they said that anybody who was an anti-vaxxer was a murderer and a criminal, and they tried to force us to put something in our bodies. And these were liberal people who say, there was the right to choose, right, in terms of an abortion. Of course, an abortion involves a third party, which is the child. The child isn't the mother, it's an extension of the mother's body. The child is living off the mother, but it is a separate person, right? Life begins at conception based in science and spirituality. And so when you're conceived, when the sperm and the egg come together, it's the sperm of the man and the egg of the woman, and it's a third person. And there's a soul creating on a spiritual level, on a scientific level, that's the, whatever's going on. On a spiritual level, there's a soul. And so it's a third person. And so it is in the woman's body. And so they're saying the woman gets a right to choose what happens in her body. but it's a third person living off the woman's body, right? The mother's body. And so it's kind of complex. And I'm not, here to talk about abortion, but injecting something into your body that isn't, I mean, whatever it is, right? You have a right to say no. Any medical ethical person knows that people can refuse medical treatment. I mean, you can refuse medical treatment that's going to save your life, right? There's people who are dying of cancer and they just refuse treatment. You get to do that. It's your choice. It might be the wrong choice, but again, the allopathic medical model isn't divine and it isn't 100% guaranteed. And medical doctors kill upwards of 250,000 people a year. The third biggest killer of people is medical doctors. And so, it isn't like it's a slam dunk, right? But this vaccine came out, and many of us said, no, I'm not doing that. I knew beforehand I don't believe in the allopathic medical model. I don't believe in pharmaceutical companies. I don't believe in the government, and I don't believe in vaccines, all of them. So I'm not I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I just have had bad experiences with the medical model, and I have seen the lies over and over again, and we know what pharmaceutical companies have done, right? And I know this is for-profit medicine. At the very least, the way it works is they want to keep you as a patient and get if you get one drug, they want you to get another drug. And so there are side effects because it's a symptom-based approach where they're addressing the symptoms, right? There's always addressing the symptoms of your disease and never getting to the root cause. There's nothing preventative. There's no vaccine to boost your immune system. There's no pill to boost your immune system. Your natural immune system, right? Those are not, vaccines don't boost your immune system. They trigger your immune system, right? And so there's no medicine out there to naturally boost your immune system. But there's lots of herbs. There's lots of things you can do naturally to boost your immune system. There's things you can do every day, in terms of your lifestyle choices to strengthen and support your immune system, but not the allopathic model because they want you to be sick all the time because you make a good customer because it's a monetary-based system. But whatever reason you didn't want to get the vax, that's your choice. And they made it mandatory. They forced people. They made businesses force people. They made people had to do it for their jobs, to be in school. Kids had to do it. Like, this is forced. And they said you were a bad person if you didn't do it. They slandered you. And this is like racism or homophobia or all the things that the liberals claim to be against, where people had a shared belief system. We had a belief system, and some of us were liberal, some of us were conservative, some of us were, middle ground people, and we were different races, we're different religions, but we all share a belief that the vaccine was not for us. And they all were prejudiced against us, calling for us to be killed, rooting for us to get sick and die from COVID, right? The spite and the vengeance, and talked about constantly like we were some kind of, people that should be thrown into concentration camps, right? All the things that these people, the liberals, particularly the Democrats, are supposed to be against. The way they treated anti-vaxxers goes against their core beliefs, things about disenfranchised groups. And then we were censored on YouTube. YouTube censored us and still is for medical misinformation, even though, so much of what they were saying was bogus science. And it was based in, at least partially, in it being a money grab, a cash cow. Where these vaccine companies, these pharmaceutical companies, who everybody hates, like everybody's got a negative story about pharmaceutical drugs, either being overpriced or being, things that cause side effects. And there's 200 drugs that cause suicidal ideation and or depression, right? Those are some of the side effects. And lots of people have had issues with drugs and their side effects from the drugs, which cause more health-related and emotionally related problems. And so, all the anti-vaxxers were forced to get something from a were, being forced and browbeaten and bullied and harassed and gaslighted into taking something that they didn't want, they knew was bad from a disreputable companies like Pfizer that are, known for-profit medicines that have caused lots of problems, including very recently the opioid epidemic that was and still is a huge problem that has ruined people's lives, killed people, destroyed families, and brought to you by the pharmaceutical industry, big pharma. And so that's how they treated all of us, right? But on top of that, they got a cherry deal in which they were going to receive no liability for any vax injuries. The vax injuries would be covered up. And the American government, the taxpayers, we would all have to pay. All of us anti-vaxxers had to pay for these vaccines out of our tax dollars. And now that there's vaccine-related injuries, which they are covering up, like this is something that we maybe don't agree on, right? But we all know. We can see it. Now we have to pay for that as well. Financial burden, right? So you guys who were anti-vaxxers, you were anti-vaxxers, you hated anti-vaxxers. The way you treated anti-vaxxers should have been considered a hate crime, right? Anti-vaxxers were exposed to a hate crime. It's all the things that are related to a hate crime. So let me show you my compilation, and this is just some of the hate that was, heaped on anti-vaxxers.
It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask. It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask. It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask.
You shouldn't cut anti-vax people out of your life. They could be dead tomorrow. Spend time with them, call them, get in the will.
Screw your freedom.
The latest data that confirms that we're still in a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Continue to be among the unvaccinated, are among the unvaccinated, are unvaccinated. The unvaccinated, there are people who are dying and who will die who didn't have to. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it now. Do it now. It could save your life and it could save the lives of those you love. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals, are overrunning emergency rooms and intensive care units, leaving no room for someone with a heart attack or pancreatitis or cancer. This is not about freedom or personal choice. It's about protecting yourself and those around you, the people you work with, the people you care about, the people you love. My job as president is to protect all Americans. My message to unvaccinated Americans is this. We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us. As I speak to you, millions of Americans are still unvaccinated and unprotected. And because of that, their communities are at risk, their friends are at risk, the people that they care about are at risk. But if you're unvaccinated, you're not. And you're putting yourself, more importantly, maybe from your perspective, your family and your friends at risk. Ultimately, those who are not vaccinated will end up paying the price.
You are not allowed to infect anybody just because you think you've got rights that are delusional, of course. This delusional, evil idea, you got to identify those people and bring them out into the open so you know who they are. If you're willing to walk among us unvaccinated, you are an enemy.
At this point, staying unvaccinated is like wearing a Yankees hat to a Red Sox game. You're probably going to end up in the hospital, and it's your own damn fault.
I was so worked up over the weekend about this fucking Aaron Rodgers of the NFL. I don't even know where to begin with that story. I mean, this fucking guy, I don't watch football. Sorry, I'm not a big fan. I know the guy's a real good football player. That's why they put up with his bullshit. If I ran the NFL,
he's going to be a Hall.
You came across as a national embarrassment.
He's talking to Aaron Rodgers. You came across as a national embarrassment.
There is no other way around it. It was the most embarrassing performance of Aaron Rodgers' career.
Jeopardy and possibly putting your teammates in jeopardy, to me, is selfish.
I'd give Aaron Rodgers some advice. It would have been nice if he'd have just come to the Naval Academy and learned how to be honest.
Southern California, where as of yesterday, we started giving the vaccine to kids aged 5 and up. Finally, our kids will be able to go to...
Let's see.
Woo! Woo! Oh.
I'm not vaccinated.
Where you go? I take horse pills.
Yeah, we have to wait for them to be vaccinated because they are selfishly a endangerment to other people, including staff people here. So while we're all hopeful, and I join the president in being hopeful that we can reach a place where it is safe for people to be. What is this, the honor system? The honor system as to whether somebody has been vaccinated? Do you want them breathing in your face on the strength of their honor? So let's just see. Let's just see. I mean, again, this is about science and governance. And science and governance, we have a responsibility to make sure that the House of the Representatives chamber is not a petri dish because of the selfishness of some not to be vaccinated.
Teach people common sense. You need to get she doesn't even know what else to do to get the people of her state to get smart and listen to the facts and get vaccinated so people don't die. It's like that simple. Is it not the people who choose to remain unvaccinated right now who are causing all of this?
It is selfish at this point to not get vaccinated.
If you can be vaccinated and you refuse to, that's a selfish act. You're putting other people's lives and health at risk. You should get vaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
The new cases in COVID are because of unvaccinated folks. But it's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks. It's the unvaccinated folks that are letting us down.
The people who are not getting vaccines, who are believing the lies on the internet instead of science, it's time to start shaming them. What else? Or leave them behind. Because they are keeping the majority of Americans behind.
I think I just passed a house with a Halloween yard decoration that was a bunch of skeletons burning an anti-vaxxer at the stake. I'm gonna go.
And so there it is. It says anti-vaxxer right here. Took me a while to see this. That's why I'm pointing it out. And it's got a bunch of skeletons sitting around a campfire roasting a skeleton anti-vaxxer. This is supposed to be a fire, which is pretty effed up. Like, it's really effed up, right? And what my wife pointed out was, what did these guys die from?
Not that Halloween is a contest, but they want it.
It's the platforms like Facebook.
They're killing people. I mean, look, the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated. And they're killing people.
What he's saying there is that posting words on social media is killing people. And they've made this like the worst thing. That you're a bad person for posting things that aren't verified by the official story. This is a guy who droned children. He ordered the deaths of children in Afghanistan when he ordered a drone strike on an imaginary enemy to distract from a failed war and a disastrous withdrawal. And so there are horrible things being done all the time. But now they've made posting things on social media one of the worst ones. But it ended up not being true, right? He demonized anti-vaxxers and people who were posting things on the internet, and ended up being him who was the liar and the person that was putting people in jeopardy.
Effects or reactions would be most common from these vaccines?
Well, generally, the most common reaction is what you see with most any other vaccine. A sore arm, a little bit aches, you might feel a little bit fatigued and down for 24 hours to 36 hours at the most. A small percentage of the people might get a fever that would last for 24 hours. You take a Tylenol, you can take care of that without much problem. The safety of severe adverse events is really very good. In the 30,000 people in the Moderna trial and the 44,000 people In the Pfizer trial, the one we're talking about today, there were really no severe adverse events.
They didn't list any side effects. I mean, that's, a sore arm or, these things. I mean, he's talking about just how you feel after you get the vaccine, not 2 months out or 3 years out or 5 years out. But now we know that there are multiple side effects, which I'll get into after we go through these things here. We know that there is admitted to side effects, things that they're investigating, and things that are related to people dying. And one of the ways we know that they were being deceptive and not saying what some of the side effects were, because they never showed you commercials that came from the pharmaceutical companies themselves. It was social influencers or media personalities or Jojo Magoo. It wasn't Pfizer posting commercials, because if they did that, they would have had to list all the side effects, which we still don't know what those are, right, in terms of what they discovered. And it's still being studied, right? It's not even like they're fully, it's fully been vetted by even the pharmaceutical companies themselves. So this was all lies, right? Again, they lied to people and said that this thing was safe and safer than getting COVID. And, this turned out to be not true, right?
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated. It's to prevent severe disease, which we don't have data for that for kids. But I guess to me, the risk-benefit calculation looks like this. If the vaccines are safe and the side effects are things like fatigue and headache and muscle soreness at the injection site, I would much rather deal with that for a day or not at all. I mean, most people actually have no side effects. And so I would much rather deal with side effects like that, but understanding that we're giving something that is safe and that can prevent the possibility of something horrible from happening, which is every parent's worst nightmare.
The question asked by the presenter was that because children really weren't dying from COVID, why give them a vax and risk any sort of side effects and things from the vax? And she, of course, said that there was no real side effects from the vax, which we now know is completely false, right? And we know that kids, there's something like 1,500 kids or less than that was the official statistics on the CDC died from COVID. Many of them had severe health issues going into the disease, right? So what she said here is, that she's saying, well, your worst nightmare is your kid's going to die. Again, putting the fear out there. There is a positive association with the word safe. Advertisers and presenters use the word safe to get people to buy their products. Safety is a big thing with people. And when they're scared of something like they were of COVID, and they were offered something that would keep them and their family safe, and they withheld information or out and out lied or, just made false claims with no scientific basis and saying this would keep you safe, then people went and got the vax. And now we know that things are different. And so all these lies and deceptions, and she had the nerve to say the unvaccinated can't be trusted, right? And so the other piece to this, which we now know, and both Bill Gates, I have the memes here, I've saved these things, and Fauci have both admitted that COVID wasn't beaten by the vaccine. The idea that the vaccine would give herd immunity and COVID would disappear because everyone would be vaccinated and they wouldn't get COVID because they had the vaccine, and then, it would just disappear because no one would have it and they couldn't pass it on to other people. This idea of herd immunity through vaccination. We now know that COVID mutated itself out of existence, or mutated itself into a more safer, more contagious form, and that everyone had ended up getting it anyway. So the vaccine turned out to be relatively unnecessary based in what these guys are saying here.
In beating COVID-19?
Well, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B-cell and T-cell immunity, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines.
I think what one referred to, what was not anticipated, was the extent of the mutations and the amino acid substitutions in Omicron, which is really unprecedented. It kind of came out of nowhere, where you have a virus that has 50 mutations, 30 of which are in the spike protein and 10 or 12 of which are in the receptor binding domain. The thing that's important is that it appears to be able to evade some of the immune protection of things like monoclonal antibodies, convalescent plasma, and the antibodies that are induced by vaccines. That's the sobering news against severe disease. But when you get to Omicron, the protection significantly goes down.
Keeping the events that are safe and also the events that have fun for people too. We can't be canceling everything, especially if we're going to be living with COVID for the foreseeable future. I would say that if you choose to go, make sure that you're vaccinated and boosted. Make sure that you're wearing a mask, even though it's outdoors. If there are lots of people packed around you, wearing a 3-ply surgical mask. Don't wear a cloth mask. Cloth masks are little more than facial decorations. There's no place for them in light of Omicron. And so wear a high-quality mask, at least a 3-ply surgical mask. And if you're going to be visiting elderly relatives.
Recently, when you said here on CNN that cloth masks were, quote, little more than facial decorations. So in light of Omicron, what kind of mask should we all be wearing? And were you surprised by the pushback from your comments?
Well, I was surprised because this is not the first time that I or Professor Osterholm or really any of us public health experts have been saying that cloth masks are not appropriate for this pandemic. It's not appropriate for Omicron. It was not appropriate for Delta, Alpha, or any of the previous variants either, because we're dealing with something that's airborne. We're dealing with a virus that's extremely contagious. At the very beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know about masking. And then we didn't have enough masks, enough high quality masks for healthcare workers. And so we were trying to ration those. But then pretty quickly, we recognized that COVID is airborne.
Do you agree with the move?
I do. There was and is a time and place for pandemic restrictions, but when they were put in, it was always with the understanding that they would be removed as soon as we can. And in this case, circumstances have changed. Case counts are declining. Also, the science has changed, but rather that the responsibility should shift from a government mandate imposed from the state or the local district or the school. Rather, it should shift to an individual responsibility by the family, who can still decide that their child can wear a mask if needed.
Take New Jersey, the case in New Jersey, for instance, their new case average is just over 4,000. Is that an acceptable number to do this, or are they projecting out to March 7th at this point?
I don't think we should be looking at case counts at all at this point, especially when we're dealing with a milder variant and when so many people were exposed to Omicron and therefore have at least some level of protection either through vaccination or immunity. The key number that we should be looking at is hospitalizations. If our ICUs and hospitals in that particular region are not overwhelmed, if they're not over capacity, we can set a number, for example, 75% or 80% full, then we should be able to relax all restrictions. And I actually believe that we should be starting to, with the first restriction removed, should actually be the restriction on children. Because while for adults, you could say, well, what's the harm of adults masking when they go into a grocery store? There actually is a harm that we should be discussing of children continuing to mask. That doesn't mean that masking doesn't have its place for children when there are very high rates of hospitalization. If we get a new variant in the future that children are particularly susceptible to, we may want to bring masks back. But we should also be intellectually honest and say that masking has had a cost, especially for the youngest learners, people with English as a second language, children with learning disabilities. There has been a cost to them. So the risk-benefit calculation has really changed.
But she's had the flu for 14 days. Should she get a flu shot?
Well, no. If she got the flu for 14 days, she's as protected as anybody can be, because the best vaccination is to get infected yourself.
And
so
she should not get it?
If she really has the flu, she definitely doesn't need a flu vaccine. If she really has the flu,
she should not get it again.
No, she doesn't need it, because it's the most potent vaccination is getting infected yourself.
The current vaccines are not infection blocking. They're not broad, so when new variants come up, you lose protection. And they have very short duration, particularly in the people who matter, which are old people.
I knew these vaccines were not going to protect against infection, and I think we overplayed the vaccines, and it made people then worry that it's not going to protect against severe disease and hospitalization. It will, but let's be very clear. 50% of the people who died from the Omicron surge were older, vaccinated.
Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stop immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market.
So let's add this to the compilation, right? So this is this piece of shit, Sean Penn, who's supposed to be a liberal advocate for human rights, and yet he's pushed the Ukrainian war where millions of Ukrainians have died and are suffering because of this whole, they could have reached some sort of agreement about Ukraine not joining NATO, right? But he's done all these kind of things where he's on the wrong side of stuff, but he pretends to be a person who's about human rights. And he had this to say, this is like a hate crime, kind of rhetoric about anti-vaxxers.
What's through your mind when you hear a lot of the anti-vaccine rhetoric?
It's a cowardice of conviction. I think that it is an unwillingness to engage in a culture of common sense that at this point it seems criminal to me, actually.
It's criminal. He just said it's criminal. It's criminal to him. This dope, right? Spicoli. Fucking Spicoli, right? This actor who's going to smelt his Oscar if they don't honor Zelensky. But, his mom about all these other tragedies is saying it's criminal. This is hate speech. That if you don't want to put something in your body, which is your choice, right? Medicines, you have, this is your medical right to put something in your body. This is medical ethics, even for the allopathic medical system. It's criminal. Like, how much money is Pfizer paying you? You shill, right? It's criminal. You should be locked up. This should be a crime. That you should be in prison. You should be convicted of a felony for not putting a vaccine in your body, in your kid's body, right? And this is the kind of rhetoric. This is what they're talking about. This is what I'm talking about. This is hate speech, right? And it turned out to be 100% wrong. There was no reason for them to push the vax at all. It had basically no effect, which we'll get into with Bill Gates in a moment. But even if it did, it's still, even if it was the life-saving vaccine that they said it was, and it isn't, and even if there was no side effects, which there are, even if those things were true, we still get a right to say no to what we put in our bodies. That's not criminal. I mean, it's just hate speech.
That at this point, it seems criminal to me, actually. I really feel that that if someone chooses not to be vaccinated, that they should choose to stay home, not go to work, not have a job. These are, as long as we're all paying for these streets, we got to ride safely on them. And so I'm just hopeful that the mindset will change. And it started, we know that this really started with leadership voids. And now I think that there are some examples of leadership that are being helpful with it. But we really got to get everyone else, everybody on the same page. And I think the CDC should be much more clear.
But, he didn't care he didn't care about human rights when his guy, Joe Biden, droned 7 children and I think it was 12 total people in Afghanistan, or when Obama was droning kids in these, Middle Eastern countries. These illegal wars that were perpetrated and then what's going on now in the Ukraine, but he, wants to make anti-vaxxers stay at home and not participate in society, and he was 100% wrong, right? You know what else was 100% wrong? This piece of shit Trump, who said he was a father of the vaccine.
Very long. We've instituted it before. 2 additional
companies, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. As you know, the Johnson & Johnson's a one-dose, one-shot vaccine, so we're going to see how that works. That would be very helpful if that all came out, and I think it probably will. Also, they're showing tremendous promise, all of them, tremendous problem. We're very hopeful that the FDA will authorize the Pfizer vaccine within days. We've got to get it moving. And Moderna vaccine almost immediately thereafter. Large numbers of tests and samples have been done, so hopefully that'll go very quickly. If authorized, tens of millions of vaccine doses will be available this month, and we'll get it distributed very quickly. We'll have that all set, and hundreds of millions more will quickly follow. Every American who wants the vaccine will be able to get the vaccine. And we think by spring we're going to be in a position that nobody would have believed possible just a few months ago. You know, amazing, really amazing. They say it's somewhat of a miracle, and I think that's true. The plan we put forward prioritizes the elderly and patients with underlying conditions, as well as healthcare workers and first responders.
Greatest achievements was getting the vaccine done in 9 months instead of 5.5 to 12 years. But the problem is, you know, we saved tens of millions of lives all over the world, but I can't talk about it because our base, our beautiful base of which some of you are there, you get angry when we mention the word vaccine. Don't get angry.
You did everything you could to get this vaccine out. I know
It was
where you
one
stand
of
on
the
the
greatest
vaccine.
achievements. We did it in less than 9 months.
To be able to do that.
Yeah,
But now it's taken a twist, right?
And then people don't want it, and it probably even affects the others because, you know, there's a big situation with a lot of people don't want to take the vaccine. Well, this played right into their hands. And they want me to do public service messages and everything about everybody taking the vaccine. And look, I guess in a certain way, I'm the father of the vaccine because I was the one that pushed it. You know, to get it done in less than 9 months was a miracle. Fauci said it would take 3 to 5 years. He thought it was something that just wouldn't be that effective because it would take so long to get. I pushed the FDA like they have never been pushed before. I wouldn't exactly say they're in love with me. They have never. This is a very bureaucratic organization. I pushed them like they've never been pushed before, and that's why we have it.
The vaccine is one of the greatest achievements of mankind. We would have had in 1917, remember the Spanish flu, killed perhaps 100 million people. Can you imagine if you had to go through what all of the countries of the world who are now getting the vaccine or soon will be getting it from various companies, but can you imagine if all of those countries had to go through what they've been going through over the last year? You'd lose hundreds of millions of people.
Let the teachers get the vaccine. They should get the vaccine. I hope they do. Again, it's something I'm very proud of. I think if we didn't come up during the Trump administration with a vaccine, you could have 100.
The best one, I'll play it again. I got a better version. I found it on Fox, where Trump said he was the father of the vaccine, and it was a miracle. He is claiming divinity. The vaccine was divine, and his, you know, whatever. This should put a stake in the coffin of this MNFer's candidacy. I mean, this is, you know, even for the most hardcore Trumpers, you got to see this guy he got played. He played himself. He played you. I mean, just a, you know, absolute POS. Let's play that clip again.
And look, I guess in a certain way, I'm the father of the vaccine because I was the one that pushed it. You know, to get it done in less than 9 months was a miracle.
So I'm just showing you this, that you remember that Trump's a piece of shit who pushed this thing because he got worked on COVID, and he took credit for it. He was the father of the vaccine. So you don't think this is some sort of political hit piece or something like this. This has nothing to do with any of that. Trump is, you know, a pusher of this thing, and he was a big part of the problem. You know, it's creating the conditions for this hate crime against anti-vaxxers, and all the people who didn't want to take the shot and got forced to, many of whom are having side effects. Of course, we know that Chris Cuomo is now covering this. He was somebody who said the same kind of stuff about anti-vaxxers, and now he's claiming he is possibly vaccine injured, and there's other people he has on his show, and then, of course, all these other people who have, you know, ran with this after the fact. But let's establish the baseline here first before I get into that. And that's with Bill Master Gates.
In beating COVID-19?
Well, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B-cell and T-cell immunity. And it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines.
So this guy is as pro-vax as they come. And he's saying that Omicron destroyed COVID more than the vaccinations did, right? Because what happened was that COVID mutated itself out of existence in terms of being deadly, and people got used to it, and their bodies got used to it, just like any other disease. And so the vaccine didn't do what they said it was going to do. People got sick with the vaccine. People passed it to other people. People died after getting the vaccine. So it wasn't any of the things that they promised, which, I've covered. You see in the compilation, the various things that were said there. And so we can all agree on that. And now there are side effects. Now the debate over side effects and the pharmaceutical company and the government suppressing information about side effects is more debatable. But we do know that Americans have lost their faith in the medical institution. And, well, let me show you those. There are two things I want to show you here. So it seems like Americans regret getting the vaccine. There's an article here from MSNBC, and it said this: poll Democrats and independents are glad they got the COVID vaccine. Most Republicans regret it. And so I'm not sure there's an overall number, but 57% of Republicans say it was not worth it to get the vaccine, right? It said here 29% of independents and 5% of Democrats said it wasn't worth it. And so, there's, I don't know what that's maybe 40%, 50%. They don't have the total, how many people. And so that's what people are already saying now. But wait till they get side effects. If there's long-term side effects of the vaccine and, whatever it might be. But in terms of people who didn't get the vaccine, there isn't a large number. I would think probably 1 or 2% that say that they regret it, right? And then there's this right here. Top Fauci aide apologized to Deborah Ross when grilled about his conduct.
From North Carolina for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Morenz, I really take very seriously these allegations of misconduct and the unauthorized disposition of NIH email records, your blatant disregard for transparency obligations under FOIA, and the manner in which you conducted yourself, including disparaging language toward others of differing perspectives, not only call into question your judgment, but also—
So what she's talking about there is other doctors and medical people that didn't agree with the rhetoric, the pro-pharmaceutical, pro-vax rhetoric that was not based in science. And they said things and made claims that weren't true, and they demonized anti-vaxxers and people with like some kind of psychological problem, and that they were a threat to society, which this was the evidence that was put out there. This was the so-called scientific research that didn't exist that led to this hate crime, right? This hate rhetoric.
Also your character, and on a larger scale, they inflict serious damage on public trust for the entire scientific enterprise. Because when you work for the federal government, you're not just working for yourself. You're working for the people, and you're working with your colleagues. Since the start of the pandemic, we have seen a decline in the public's confidence in science and public health. One study conducted by the Pew Research Center found that between April 2020 and October 2023, the number of Americans who reported that they had a great deal of trust in scientists fell by 16%, from 39% to 23%.
So only 39% of people have trust and faith in science before COVID. So that shows you what science has done, right? and people who have issues, health issues, whatever it is, people who are survivors of people who die at the hands of doctors and all the rest of it, right? Because scientists can be bought. It isn't that science is disputable when it's done correctly. I mean, science, can be disputable based in, how you interpret it. But it's the way it's interpreted that these shills, these scientists who can be bought by the highest bidder, will misread data or disinclude data and fudge the science for personal profit, and because some corporation or some government wants them to do that, right? In this case, it came at the cost of hate being spewed at anti-vaxxers, so much so that they became what would be considered a marginalized group in any other context, right? Let's keep on going here.
And while proliferation of misinformation about COVID-19 has certainly fueled this decline, when the American public sees that one of the federal government's own scientists was potentially trying to hide their work-related conversations from the public by using a personal email, that will only lead to further distrust in our nation's scientific community. And this decline in the confidence in the scientific enterprise has rippled and had health effects that we're seeing even now. For example, we've seen the effect of the distrust in science specifically within our vaccine records. A recent survey from the Annenberg Public Policy Center found that the proportion of respondents who did not believe in vaccines that are approved in the United States, it doubled from nearly doubled from 9% to 16% between April 2021 and the fall of 2023.
I was one of the 9%.
And with new variants of the coronavirus, fewer and fewer people are getting their booster shots. As we hold today's hearings, the United States is at the precipice of losing our measles elimination status due to repeated outbreaks of the disease that have popped up across the country, from Florida to Ohio to Missouri to California. This is especially concerning as 250,000 kindergartners nationwide haven't received their updated measles immunization, leaving them unprotected from this deadly disease. That is not your fault. But what I am saying is...
It's not your fault. Like, she's a mainstream person, and he's going to, do a sort of pseudo-apology. But the thing is that you have to understand with pharmaceutical companies, if their goal is profit, which it is, if their goal is to create the best possible business model, the best thing that can happen to humanity is that their immune systems are compromised, that your natural immune system is compromised, and you have to depend on these allopathic pharmaceutical drugs for your health, and that you're a patient, you're a constant patient of theirs. You can function enough so you can hold a job, and you can have money so you can pay to the big pharma, so you can't be like dead or incapacitated, but you have to have numerous chronic conditions, and that's what's happening. And this is what the mainstream medical model has ultimately done for people, for folks, right?
And people don't trust scientists. They don't trust the science. So you've answered this question in another way, but do you agree that your conduct as a scientist working for the federal government betrayed the highest ethical standards that are expected of you and are expected to maintain the trust of the American people?
Well, that's a several-part statement, and let me...
He's defensive here.
Let me answer it by saying, I've always thought of myself as an ethical person.
He did. He just thinks, well, then you must be. If you think you're an ethical person, you fucking must be.
Important to me to tell the truth and do decent things.
He does decent things, not great things, but pretty decent.
That's why I stuck my head up to defend Peter when he was under death threats. Obviously, and I thought all these things I was doing that were on my private email, my private Gmail, were outside the domain of my official job as a private citizen. But I've obviously made mistakes. I've mixed up.
I made some mistakes. I made a few mistakes here, though. They're not unethical mistakes. They're just, like innocent mistakes, decent mistakes.
Emails and Gmails, and that's caused me to do all of the things you mentioned, but bring discredit on myself and on the government. I don't know what to say. I've apologized. I regret that. I wish I could take it back.
You wish you could take it all back, right? What about the hate that you guys steeped and, created the conditions for, the hate that was put on all of us who don't believe in the vaccine and vaccines in general? What about that? You regret that? Okay, so let's talk about hate speech and hate crimes, which are, of course, two different things. And I'm going to talk about hate again the way that I see it. The term hate can be misleading. When we use the term hate crime, the word hate does not mean rage, anger, or general dislike. In the context of hate, means bias against a group, or against people or groups with specific characteristics that are defined by law. And so this usually applies to people who, based in their religion, their ethnicity, their gender, any of these things, right? Their color, their skin, these things. But also you can talk about it being belief systems where there is bias against people and groups based in their belief system. And people in the so-called truth community and anti-vaxxers experience this, right? And so here, the crime in hate crime is a violent crime such as assault, murder, arson, vandalism, or threats to commit such crimes, which was definitely happening against anti-vaxxers. It also may cover conspiring or asking another person to commit such crimes, even if the crime was never carried out, which is also was done with anti-vaxxers, right? But then we have hate speech, which is definitely here. Hate speech in any form is the expression through speakers intent to vilify, humiliate, or incite hatred against a group or a class of persons on the basis of race, religion, skin color, sexual identity, gender identity, ethnicity, disability, or national origin. And you can add here somebody's belief system, because that's what's happened, right? Okay, so there are two principles at play here that I cover on. One of them, which is about hate, that I talk about more in my Pockets of the Future channel when I get into more of my spiritual beliefs. The other is when you're a hypocrite, when you're against a behavior, when it's only to you and the groups of people that you care about. Justifying a behavior because the other people are deemed lesser than you. So the first part is that hate is something inside somebody. This is Sajmarg, the meditation that I do 101. That hate is something inside of you. When you feel hatred, it's your hatred. The object of your hate is external, but the hate itself is internal. In the Sajmarg teaching and just in life in general, it's a spiritual poison, and it sucks to feel hate. It sucks to be around people who are feeling hate and anger and fear and all these things, right? And so, it's just, it behooves a person to get rid of the hate that's inside of them. Generalized hate. Not hate against a person, not hate against a group, but just hate overall as a condition that's in your internal system. And it can be cleaned out, and with some, mental discipline and some internal work, you can get rid of the hatred in your system, right? Where you just don't feel that way, even if people are horrible people, even if people are wronging you, even if people maybe even deserve some anger and hate towards them based in their treatment of you or treatment of other people. It is cleaned out and it isn't there. You can still see them without the emotion, without the feeling of hate, right? You can still see the negative behaviors. You're still aware of the negative behaviors, but you don't have that reaction. So that's the first part. The second part is that, I say this quite a bit to my own viewers. For example, I used to mock Britney Spears, I do a lot of mockery and things on my channel. And I would get right-wing Republican people, truthers, people that are sort of in my, demographic, who would chastise me because they identified with Britney because she came from the South, or she was blonde, or she was like them. And they would say she's been abused, and, they would say, whatever they would say towards me about being mad at me for mocking her. But I would say to them, you didn't have a problem when I was mocking Lady Gaga or Cardi B or any of these other lefty sort of performers that you dislike and you hate, or you have negative feelings towards. It's just because you identify with Britney, because those Lady Gaga and Cardi B and a lot of these female celebrities all say that they were abused, sexually abused, and abused in a similar way to Britney, right? A lot of these women who you don't like are, they suffered the same kind of things that Britney suffered. And so what I say about that is you're not against the behavior. You laughed along and you liked it when I mocked people that you don't like, but when I mock people you do like, you get mad at me. So it's not that you're against mocking. And again, I'm not defending mockery here, right? I'm just saying this is something that exists in people. Sure, you can complain about a behavior if you're against it in all forms. So all these liberal people, all these left-wing people, all YouTube and their, YouTube has whole categories of hate speech and, these things on their platform, all these community guideline strikes things, community guidelines strikes you can receive for a video. They have it for all these various protected groups. But somehow it's completely okay for everybody, Republicans, Democrats, politicians, celebrities, people all over YouTube, to condemn anti-vaxxers. And remember, when this was going on, people were freaked out and were scared of dying of COVID. And they were given a villain that was going to make it, harder for them or put them at risk and at threat. And it was anti-vaxxers. And the president was carrying the torch for the pharmaceutical companies to demonize anti-vaxxers and create hate speech of a group who had every right not to receive the vaccine. And YouTube and all these platforms endorsed it, right? And so this was done by Disney and ESPN, and we're going to get into Kyrie Irving and Aaron Rodgers, the way they were treated. But all this hate and, anger and, all this stuff came at these people, came at people who were, who just didn't want to get the vax, which was in their right. And they didn't, they weren't putting other people at risk. They weren't doing anything bad. They weren't bad people. But there was hate speech and hate crimes and the potential hate crimes that went along with it because of the rhetoric that was, perpetrated by the Democratic Party and to some extent the Republican Party and, all the mainstream media and, sports channels and all these people, right? And now they need to be held accountable. They need to admit they're wrong, which they won't, and apologize, which I don't care about, but they should, just on the basis of, this is what they did. They're hypocrites and they go against their very beliefs because they all say they're against hate speech, but they couldn't wait to jump on the hate bandwagon, oftentimes because they were, being paid by Pfizer or some other pharmaceutical giant. And so the networks themselves had a financial stake in demonizing anti-vaxxers because the pharmaceutical companies wanted to get into every person in every, in each capacity. And now those people, like if you believe in the side effects, which I certainly do, are who have been vaccinated, now they're coming up with other drugs to deal with the side effects of the vaccine. So it's been a windfall profit for the pharmaceutical companies who got the government to pay for the vaccines and then to force people to take them. So let's start with ESPN and Kyrie Irving here. Okay, so let's start off here. ESPN's Allison Williams explains why she is giving up her job over vaccine mandate. That in early September, Williams shared on Twitter that she decided not to get a COVID-19 vaccine while her and her husband are trying to have a second child. The vaccine at this time is not in my interest. Here she is here.
So I know I've been a bit mum since releasing the statement I put out a few months ago now regarding my decision to not receive the COVID-19 vaccine. I just want to give everybody an update on my situation with ESPN. And a great producer once told me, don't bury the lead. So I have been denied my request for accommodation by ESPN and the Walt Disney Company. And effective next week, I will be separated from the company. First of all, thank you, everyone who reached out and texted, emailed, called, messaged me. I can't tell you how much light it brought in a really dark and difficult time. And I've also had a lot of people, and women in particular, reach out and share their stories in regards to fertility and getting the injection. And to the women who got it and have had and are having successful pregnancies and have babies in their arms, I'm beyond thrilled for you. Congratulations. That's amazing and terrific. And I believe you. To the women who have reached out and shared their experiences of getting the injection and subsequent miscarriages, menstrual irregularities, periods after menopause.
Oh, okay, so you get the idea here, right? So ESPN, let's go to here. So they've stolen my bit, and I don't know if they've ever saw my bit, but you guys know my bit, right? Rooster, rooster, rooster for booster, booster, booster. Like it's, let me just show you my thing here. But this is their thing.
One place to look, Luka going off. First quarter, Kevin Harlan.
It's called Wake Up Call. You know, they've stolen a lot of terminology from the truth community across the board. But ESPN is particularly egregious. So ESPN, which has a relationship with Pfizer and other big pharmaceutical companies, forced all their employees to not only to get the injection themselves, but to be pro-vax in everything that they said. Stephen A. Smith, who's their highest paid employee, who makes $8 million a year, came out and said that he had some doubts about the vax too, but he was not going to give up his $8 million a year. And he then started to savage Kyrie Irving and Kyrie Irving's character, as did all these ESPN pundits, right? And I'll get into Pat McAfee in a bit and Aaron Rodgers, because that ties into this. That was where I originally got this idea to make this video. But they savaged with hate speech Kyrie Irving, who, you know, he went to the Brooklyn Nets. He went back to where he grew up. You know, he grew up in New Jersey, Brooklyn area. And he went there to play basketball with Kevin Durant, and with the attempt to bring them a championship by both of them signing with the Brooklyn Nets. But New York was one of the worst on COVID and then the COVID vaccine, right? There were so many deaths. I mean, New York led the nation in deaths, only to be surpassed by California, all the stuff that they did during COVID. And then they made the vaccines mandatory in California and New York, which turned out to be unconstitutional, which we knew all along it was. And so Kyrie Irving was right. And Kyrie Irving said it wasn't just about him. He was standing up for other people who were forced to get the vax because of their job, which was very noble on his part, right? And he gave up at least $18 million and then, another, millions of dollars. He probably lost maybe between $50 and $100 million in NBA contracts. Nike unsigned him, and he was right all along, right? He was attacked for that and anti-Semitism, which he wasn't anti-Semitic, and he just posted a video that had stuff that people considered anti-Semitic in it. And he was savaged because of his position on the vaccines, and now he is doing really well in basketball. So we'll get into that in just a moment. Well, here, we'll get into it now. So this guy, Kendrick Perkins, is saying Kyrie Irving deserves an apology, and he's apologizing to him. And then he also was talking about how eventually Kyrie might tell his story. So the Dallas Mavericks have won the Western Conference, and they're now playing for the NBA Finals. And Kyrie Irving has done great in terms of his basketball skills, but also in terms of his leadership. And he's been a leader, and the inspiration behind the team, and sacrificing so that he can promote Luka Doncic, and he's done a stellar job. And just this morning, I turned on Get Up with this guy Greenberg, or whatever his name is. Greeny is what they call him. And he was talking about how Kyrie Irving is on a redemption tour. And all these announcers are talking about how Kyrie has redeemed himself. And the only thing he's redeemed is your story, your faulty story, your slanderous story about him. Because he was right on the vaccine, which most people will agree now. And we'll see this being talked about on Pat McAfee with another basketball player who got the vaccine. Someone who's part of a sort of a royal basketball family. But so many people now are regretting getting the vaccine. And we all know that the hate speech that was dumped on Kyrie Irving and Aaron Rodgers and all the rest of us was misplaced and wrong. and goes against everything that you supposedly believe in, right? And so let's get into it here.
Yeah.
Kyrie Irving, what he's done this season and in the postseason, guess what? He got a lot of people waking up, looking themselves in the mirror. We have answers. We need answers to a lot of questions right
We need answers to a lot of questions.
now. Why is Kyrie Irving not on the Olympic team? Why is Kyrie Irving not a top 75 greatest player of all time?
So, what he's talking about is the prejudice against Kyrie Irving, which again relates to hate speech. So the NBA has put out an Olympic team, and Kyrie Irving wanted to be on it, and the other players wanted him to be on it, but he wasn't invited. And so, like, that shows prejudice because of his positions, which again turned out to be right. He's also clearly one of the top 75 players of all time based in his. I mean, he's just better than other people who are on on that. So, some of these other things, right? He's a player who's won an NBA championship, and he just has a skill set that, I mean, he makes incredible shots, and he has, just an incredible handle in terms of his ability to dribble the ball. So that's what he's talking about here.
Doing right now, look, his leadership, right, has been outstanding for the Dallas Mavericks.
So they're all talking about his leadership, right? And he was considered a cancer, that no team wanted him. Dallas was criticized for trading him, and they said this relationship between Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic would never work because they were both ball hogs and they were both selfish, and they couldn't coexist. And he had no offers in terms of free agency. So he signed for less money than he deserved. Kendrick Perkins just pointed out that he had similar numbers to Anthony Edwards, who is, an all-NBA player. There's three, there's first team, second team, third team NBA, all-NBA players, and Anthony Edwards was on the second team. Luka Doncic was on the first team. Kyrie Irving should have been at least on the third team, based on the numbers and his importance to the team. And so, like, everyone's changing their opinion of the guy and saying that he changed and he's redeemed himself. Now he's kept his mouth closed. He hasn't been a problem in terms of talking truth. But the things he said were right and justified, and he's kind of a hero, right? Somebody who puts up, loses upwards of $50 million, $100 million in endorsements and contracts. I mean, he lost $100 million based in him standing up for what he believed, right? Which turned out to be right, and this was this hate that was driven towards all the people who believe what Kyrie Irving believed, right? Then this piece of shit talks about it here.
Was for him, and the year before that was for him. That stuff is still there, and that's why decisions were made about him. I mean, what he's doing right now is laundering.
So this guy is one among many who's changed his opinion about the vax, at least it seems like, because he was hammering Kyrie Irving. Like, there's another one that happened 2 days ago where he apologizes to Kyrie Irving. This thing just came out this morning. Very timely for me making this video. But here's this guy still talking about his decisions. His decisions were great. He decided he did something. Pat Tillman was celebrated as a hero for giving up a lucrative NFL career to go and die in Afghanistan, killed by friendly fire. And his family has now come out, and his friends saying that there was foul play on top of it, and certainly a cover-up. And he was used for an illegal war. But what he did was noble. Like, what Pat Tillman did was noble. What Kyrie Irving did was even bigger than that, because he was slandered and hammered, and his, all the things that were said about him. And, he was loved in the NBA. Mark Cuban talked about it, that people loved him, all the other players and things, and he was well regarded, and that the media just slandered him because this media, this guy included, they're all shills for big pharma and Pfizer. And so that's what that's about. So this guy said because Kyrie Irving's non-basketball related decisions, USA Basketball was justified in saying that he doesn't deserve to be on the team. But now, people in the black community are certainly always been very resistant or hesitant on the vaccine because of stuff that happened in the whatever that thing was called, where they were given they were given syphilis, right? The Tuskegee syphilis study, right? the Tuskegee experiment. And so now, like, there's a redemption for Kyrie Irving, not because he was wrong, but because he was right.
Well, Alan, look, my grandpa always used to tell me, it's your side of the story, their side of the story, and then it's the truth, okay? It's the truth that lies in the middle.
And the truth is not on your side, because your truth was paid for by Pfizer. Like, the truth might not be on my side completely, but I'm not being paid by Pfizer. Right? You understand that? Like, I have my own subjective, decision making, whatever. All of us do all of us who are truthers, all of us who aren't a part of the, who are anti-vaxxers or whatever they want to call us and label us, right? But when it comes out right now, and what's come out so far, the truth is much more on our side. You were the ones who were lying. You were the ones who were bullying. You were the ones who were gaslighting. And so that's with Kyrie Irving, the truth was on his side because Kyrie Irving was doing something noble and you guys were being paid by Pfizer.
And the fact of the matter is that we've heard a lot of people's side of the story, but we've never heard Kyrie Irving's side of the story when it comes down to his situation being with the Brooklyn Nets. But
so, it's hard for me to say how much I can use of this because ESPN sucks about copyright. But yeah, this is all, part of this thing. This is the big part here.
That everyone keep a cool booty because let me tell you what we all should be afraid of, right? If Kyrie Irving goes on to win the NBA championship, I'm afraid that he's going to actually tell his side of the story and what went on with the Brooklyn Nets. And once we get his side of the story, then we're going to be having another conversation.
So, so there's that, right?
You know what I'm saying? Because more apology letters are going to come out. Because, I've been taking hey, Greenie, I don't go searching for information, but sometimes information finds me. And I'm telling you right now, Sean Marks was not a saint in this situation when it came down to the Brooklyn Nets.
Okay, so Sean Marks was the general manager, or still the general manager of the Brooklyn Nets. And the way they treated Kyrie Irving during the vax situation and afterwards. So this is what happened. Some of this is Kyrie's fault in terms of getting a bad reputation. He won an NBA championship with LeBron, but then demanded a trade because he wanted his own team. He didn't want to be second fiddle to LeBron. He went to the Boston Celtics, and they had a good young core unit there. But he got hurt a couple of times. He didn't, they said he didn't nurture the younger players. He was critical of them, and he came out and said that he, felt like what LeBron must have felt with him, right? Like he kind of apologized to LeBron saying, these young guys don't get it like I didn't get it. And so he ended up not re-signing with Boston, even though he said he would. They now had a couple of stars. Of course, they're playing Boston now in the finals, which is interesting. And then he returned to Boston, and he stepped on the logo. They were booing him. They were saying stuff. Boston's kind of racist. He gave the finger to Boston. This is post-vaccination stuff, right? And so he decides to go to the Brooklyn Nets, and he convinces Kevin Durant, who wants to leave the Warriors because he was, being discredited for going there in the first place to a loaded team. And so they end up getting James Harden, so they have three good players. And when they played together, they were phenomenal. But they all got hurt at different times. And then the vaccine thing happened. James Harden demanded a trade, and Kyrie Irving was blamed because he didn't play in half the games, right? But that wasn't a bad thing that he did. He stood up for what he believed in, and we all now know he was right. Like, people are beginning to admit that, which you'll see in a bit. This is part of why I started to do this, but there's this general sense among many people that at least the anti-vaxxers were never wrong, and that they also might be right, and that's what people are coming to terms with. Okay, so this was 2 days ago. Today's Friday, May 31st, so this was the 29th or the 28th. And I saw this right after I saw the video I'm going to show you with Aaron Rodgers.
Pulling and applauding for Kyrie Irving, we need to start getting these apologies out there, okay? They need to be as loud as everybody were when they were criticizing Kyrie, and I'm one of them. Let me start off by apologizing.
So he this is again, I'm not an apology person, but admitting you're wrong, and he's not really doing that about the vax as much, but ESPN as a culture and a network and being a shill for big pharma and for the Pfizer and all that, right?
Apologizing because I had a lot of disrespectful things to say about Kyrie. Just go to the NBA Finals. I must say, I need to see those apology letters out right now, and they need to be signed.
So there was that. So this is Austin Rivers. Austin's father is Doc Rivers. Austin played in a number of NBA teams, went to Duke. And, Doc Rivers is a longtime NBA coach, won at least one NBA championship with Boston, coaches Milwaukee now. His sister and Doc's daughter married Steph Curry's sister. So they're like sort of basketball royalty, right? The family. He went on Pat McAfee. I think he went to Duke like right after Kyrie Irving did.
But more impressively, what he's been able to do with this locker room as a leader. We haven't seen Kai in this role. On the teams that he's had success at, the leader was LeBron James. And then we also saw him not do so well in Boston as a leading role. That's why this is going to be really interesting, him going back to Boston, by the way. But he's changed the entire narrative about him and has forced a lot of people to apologize.
So, this started to spark the idea for this video. Because, there's just a weird connection between winning and then people having to sort of admit you were right. It's just, Kyrie Irving doesn't win. They don't go to the NBA Finals. They might win the championship this year. And, winning sort of validates a person's behavior and position in a weird way in the sports world. Okay, so the reason I'm making this video is I saw this conversation. And then I saw the perk thing after that. But this was what gave me the idea. It's just time to make this video. And the clip I was using, I found a clip of Austin Rivers on Pat McAfee. And they took out the chunk where they're talking about the vaccine. Right? So Pat McAfee puts his whole show up on his channel. And then ESPN takes little bits and clips of it. Right? And so they took this conversation out. But I found the whole, lucky for me, I just happened to turn this on while eating breakfast or lunch or something, right? Probably breakfast. But, I was watching and I'm like, wow, they edited out the part that I remember about the vax. And so I had to go to the whole video and find it there because ESPN edited out and you'll see why, the vaccine portion.
Got some type of spirit about him. I don't know. Every time you see Kai, he's smiling, he's happy. It looks like he's enjoying work. Him and Luka are like coexisting.
Ayahuasca.
I can't do this, man.
Seriously. I'm telling you. Because if you think, you talk about what he went through and he wasn't on the court, it's like we know somebody else that that had similar.
Does his name start with an A?
They're both outside the box thinkers.
For sure. 2 A's, actually. It starts with 2 A's. Yeah.
So we're talking about Aaron Rodgers.
And I wonder, I know we're hearing now how he feels about how it all went.
Yeah, bingo.
I wonder how Kyrie's at a point where he's like, if there's humans listening right now that don't know anybody that was very much against the vaccination situation a couple of years back. Now, granted, I was vaccinated while talking to Aaron Rodgers, and I was getting cooked in 7 different languages.
Because he was on ESPN, like they made him do it.
Because of how Aaron felt about the entire thing. Now here we are years later. They all feel vindicated. Like that might be a part of Kyrie's entire.
Yeah, we all feel vindicated, right? On multiple levels. So they'll get into it. This will be the last clip I show you.
Yep, certainly hasn't forgotten.
Vibes as well. You know what I mean? Like
Texas,
they are empowered. Like they feel.
And in Dallas, they seem to cheer Kyrie even more than Luka Doncic. Luka Doncic is the better player, and he's the sort of the dominant player on the team. But the Dallas Mavericks seem to love Kyrie Irving because there's a lot of Republicans there, a lot of people who were anti-vax, and they appreciate him standing up. There's lots of people who probably more people appreciate what he did than demonized him, right? But they don't put out a poll on that, right?
I'm definitely there's definitely some regrets about just willingly just putting the needle. You know, what I mean, we all just took it, didn't we all.
So he's saying he regrets it, right? Like he regrets it, and they realized that Kyrie was. I mean, this is about, this is what Big Perk was trying to allude to, and they can't talk about it because ESPN, they're on their knees servicing Pfizer and Big Pharma.
Took that and just didn't ask questions.
We trusted.
And
we
now,
trusted.
Like years later, we trusted. We trusted the process.
We made it. Hey, listen, we all made it, right? We lost a lot of great people, but we all made it. So we beat.
Fair enough.
We beat COVID.
Yeah.
Right.
Woo! Yeah, you beat COVID. And so they said they trusted it. Now they're kind of regretting it because they're all seeing people dropping like flies. Died suddenly, and despite the pushback against it being some sort of a thing here, they all of the things that we always talk about here. So I want to wrap up. This is my conclusion to this whole thing. I built the strong case here, and so the first part is this: when you come in strong, right? When you come in strong and make claims. Now think about any sort of medicine that makes claims and those claims turn out to be false. Now the first thing is you never saw any vaccination commercials that were done by Pfizer or the other companies. So why was that? Why did you not see, like you see pharmaceutical ads all the time? Because at the end of the pharmaceutical ad, they have to list the side effects. And so Pfizer didn't run ads for the vaccine. Like they, put up public service announcements and say, have you gotten it? But they didn't have these ads that you see for pharmaceutical drugs all the time. That's on ESPN and CNN, all these news networks, because they couldn't, because they didn't want to tell you the side effects. That was the first thing. And, we don't even know what they are. They still haven't listed these things. And they're just discovering them now. So that was like the first piece to it, right? The second piece is they got shills to come in and shame you and shame anti-vaxxers into wearing masks, celebrities, all these things I showed you in my meme. That's just a partial compilations of clips that I showed on both my channels. Like that's not even everything that I had, and I didn't certainly have everything. But they had shills come on, they had social media people come on and tell you false information because it wasn't coming for the pharmaceutical companies, and vaccinations are protected anyway by the vaccine court, and so they couldn't be sued for false claims. But this is what was said by Joe Biden, the President of the United States, and many other people, that if you got COVID, you probably wouldn't get it. If you got the vaccine, it would probably prevent you from getting it all, which turned out to be completely false. Pfizer came out and said, yeah, we didn't even do research on that. So that wasn't a claim that they could make, but people like Joe Biden could, right? And so this is how big they came in. They said, you probably wouldn't get sick, but if you did get sick, it would be light, and you wouldn't pass it on to other people. And then they changed the story saying, well, you're going to get sick, but it's going to be mild. And then it turned out, well, it could be severe, but you won't be hospitalized. And they said, well, you'll be hospitalized, but you're not going to die. And they said, well, you're not going to die, but you might die, but and it's still better than not taking it. And they said you wouldn't pass it on to other people. So those claims were false, and they knew they were false, and they made them anyway. And any of us who came out and said they were false, doctors who came out, scientists who came out, were censored. They were banned and ostracized. And there was hate speech used for anti-vaxxers, and anybody criticizing, those people had to be deplatformed. People lost their social media platforms. They were given community guideline strikes for medical misinformation. And you couldn't talk about the things that you did, right? I still have a lot of things that I did because I had COVID 3 times. I had Omicron. I had whatever was left after that. And I had it bad, like in the very beginning when it first came out, me and my wife. And my health was so bad anyway. I was like entering sort of I was in my 50s, and I was entering a downtime in my life health-wise. And I just gone through a divorce, and, I'd come back from living in India for 3 years. I mean, all these things. And I was just, my immune system wasn't working the way it should. And I just, I took it on the chin, but I've rebuilt my health. Like I'm healthier than ever. And I'm doing great physically. I've been rejuvenated, and I have all these things I'm going to probably put into some audiobook or something, maybe on a different platform, because YouTube would call it medical disinformation. Not that I suggest anything, I just would tell you what I did. But you couldn't do that, right? YouTube wouldn't let you do that, and they censored everything. Like, I'm not a big ivermectin person, but they censored all those things, and those were choices people wanted to make or could have made. And so they came in big, right? Remember how big they came in, and they didn't deliver, right? And so when you come in and there's, threats towards people, and you make mandatory, this is the violence and this is where it becomes a hate crime, where people were forced to either lose their jobs or make a choice between their jobs or getting the vaccine and sending their kids to school or not, right? Giving their young kids a vaccine that maybe they didn't want to give or whatever it was. And this is where the violence was done, because if there's side effects that happen because of that, and you were forced into doing that by society for a profit, and this is the other piece to it. It was profitable, right? For-profit medicine. That its medical model is predicated on you being sick, right? And so taking something from somebody who wants you to be sick, wants you to be weak, and wants you to be a good customer, that showed, like a lot of ethical and moral bad decision making. Like, how many people hate big pharma? How many people dislike? Even Joe Biden talks about big pharma all the time, but they all back the vax, right? And so all of those things, when there's an incentive financially, ESPN and all these shills can't come out because they're still on Pfizer's payroll. YouTube can't reverse their community guideline strikes, their community guideline policies, because they're not going to apologize to people who are right, who are giving out good information. We're helping the community. They're not going to own up to it because they're still being, they're still Pfizer shill. They're still on their knees servicing Pfizer, right? And all these other pharmaceutical giants, because they make up a large amount of the ad buy. And so all these people who were bought off by Pfizer and Big Pharma, and all these people, just slammed Kyrie Irving and Aaron Rodgers and said all these things, they're not going to admit to the, all of these things are icky, because there's no truth there, because there's, the pressure of the financial institutions that are pushing for this thing. And then there's the liability for all the things that harm it's caused. And there's blood on their hands, right? This is hate crime and hate speech that you deliver toward these people. And these people aren't, the people who are saying these things, they're not good people. I mean, there are shills, and there are people who sell their souls for the money and things like this. And so they're not going to come out and admit they're wrong, right? And admit the harm they've caused, but they kind of have to, because it's just there. We all kind of know it now, right? Because we know that what they promised, they didn't deliver on. The vaccine, at the very least, didn't do what they said it was going to do, and there was no real reason for you to take it. Because those of us who didn't take it, those of us who had COVID and have worked our way, COVID was a biological weapon. I mean, that's how I experienced it. It was the weirdest thing I've ever had. There'd be times I felt completely better, and then that night I'd be gasping for breath. The first time I had it. And I went through a whole host of, people say it's a flu. It's just like stupid. If you've had it, it's like nothing like anything you've ever had. And it's some kind of, it's like a poison or a toxin more than it's a disease. But those of us who have kind of, worked our way through that and have regained our health from it could say that, you didn't need it. Like, I didn't need the vax. And, it wasn't available when I got COVID. When I got it the first 2 times, the vax wasn't even available. And so I'd already beat it twice, right? And so why should I take it? Because my body already produced an immune response because I beat it, right? And then I had to get rid of whatever the long-term effects were. They have this stuff, and I've, taken these different herbs. I've done all these things to combat that, and I feel great, right? And so it wasn't necessary. And so there was no reason for them to talk about anti-vaxxers the way they did. We had a right to make that choice, and it turns out for most of us, we celebrate that choice. We believe we were right and you were wrong, like so many things that happen in the truth community. And yet you guys haven't apologized for the hate speech and the hate crime and all the negativity that you dumped on all of us, right? And that sucks. Like, you suck as people. You suck as human beings. Like, there's no gray area here, because you were completely wrong, and now you're not, adult enough and human enough to admit to it. Not only just apologize, but redeem yourself in some way. This idea that Kyrie Irving has to redeem himself for what? You were the guys who were wrong. You were the guys who were bullying and gaslighting and doing all these negative things, right? You engaged in behaviors you say you were against, and you marginalized a group of people, like you do this with so-called conspiracy theorists who are often right. And we have a right to believe what we believe. We're not doing anybody any harm. Most of us don't have powerful positions and aren't affecting society. And the way that you speak about conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers is like we're some sort of a plague, and that you guys are so much better, and yet you guys are always wrong, and we're always right. I mean, not in all cases when there's a lot of dopes out there in the truth community, but in terms of real solid, people who are thoughtful and have critical thinking skills, we're right and you're wrong, because there's always some financial incentivized scam, some conspiracy behind all the things that are being done out there. And you guys were supporting people who are known liars and known bad guys, whether it be big giant pharma, big pharma, or politicians or media that are always doing the wrong thing and saying the wrong thing, and they're always on the wrong side of history, and yet somehow they get away with it because there's no real accountability in our system. But it's time for you guys to admit you're wrong. You won't because you suck, but it's time. The evidence is just overwhelming, and it's just going to get worse. And then just be honest about what these vaccines are doing to people. Stop blocking, the information, all these things. It's time to just, that's what a human being would do. That's what a person with a heart would do. That's what a person with any sort of self-respect and dignity would do. They would admit they were wrong, and they'd allow the information that could help people at least reconcile the things that have happened to them. Families who've lost people, 14-year-old kids having heart attacks, and the rest of it. Be honest about what COVID actually was and how it came to be and all these things that you're doing to people. But they can't do that because the truth would take down the system. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely important for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.